Welcome to Pegwarmers. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Jeff.
And we're here to talk about toys. Jeff,
Absolutely.
Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your channel real quick?
So, it started out as a Lego channel because I love Lego, and now it's evolved into, can I review an action figure in less than 6 minutes? And that answer is yes.
Okay.
So that's what I do.
Jeff does quick reviews, and because of kind of life circumstances going on with Jeff and life circumstances going on with me, our topic today is setting up your toy room. So, Jeff, what's going on in your life that's resulting in you sort of resetting up and redoing your toy room?
So, like a year and a half ago or so, my wife and I were living in this rental, and we were like, man, our rent is crazy. And then we did the math on it, and our mortgage is not what we were paying in rent, and we were like, let's do it. So we found a house, we got the house, and oh my God, the house was a fixer-upper because, we're young and, all that fun stuff, and there was crazy paint on the wall. Our living room looked like Ringling Brothers Circus. It was like yellow, like mustard yellow and ketchup red. It was bad. It was real bad. So we get everything, we get that gutted, fixed, and we moved on to the bedrooms. And my wife was like, well, why don't you make the office until, we start having kids and stuff, like your toy room? Like, yeah, okay. A year and 2 months later, we finally have that room situated and figured out, and now I'm putting up shelves and putting up lots of stuff. So it's basically Christmas for the last week for me because, toys.
Nice. And so I recently moved from a house that I lived in on my own that was kind of toy explosion everywhere to a house with my wife and my stepsons. And so the toys have been relegated to the basement. It's a pretty nice space to work in, but it's kind of like a blank canvas that's already full with a mountain of bins. So that's kind of my situation. Before we dive into that topic more, though, we have a couple little segments that we do. For news, we want to talk about the Mezco turtles. Jeff, why don't you tell us a little about the turtles? You were actually the person that told me the news earlier in the week or last week.
So they look awesome. You get all 4 turtles. You get a buttload of accessories. Every turtle apparently has a unique mold to it. So like Leonardo won't look like Donatello, which is something we've always wanted. I mean, even with the NECA movie turtles that came out, which are fantastic, and I love them. Okay, so you slapped on a different bandana and gave them a different head.
Right. The heads are what change, and the belts change, and pretty much the texturing on the skin is the same. And I get it for cost reasons. Like, they're not that unique looking that you couldn't have the same forearms or the same shins, but it is pretty cool when you can have unique scratches and patterns and things like that on them.
Right, exactly. It was always funny to see Raph, because I'm a big Ninja Turtle comic guy.
Okay.
Raph, who was like always, in toy form, who was always like pristine and, everything is great. But like, Raph's the bruiser. Like, he's got cuts and scars and everything else. And like, the Mezco figures actually demonstrate that really well with everything that's coming out. Like, there's a lot of cloth accessories.
Yeah.
There's a lot of weapons and like a lot of throwbacks to either the show, the movie, or the comics. And I guess kind of like the broad scale of it. The price point is a little much for me, but maybe with some saving and some Santa Claus, it might happen. But $400, it's worth it, in my opinion.
I mean, for that scale and that level of detail, it's not going to be cheap. So I get where it's coming from, and when they're not reusing parts, that's also going to increase the cost. It's not 4 heads with 4 identical bodies, so that the cost is going to go up with that. But they look fantastic. Exactly. It's a really cool set.
They really, really do. And like, if you think about it, like a Mezco figure goes for like what, $90 to $100 typically, depending on the brand and yada shmada. And like $400 for 4 turtles and like the normal accessories that they would get right in a single figure.
Right.
But then you have like the cloaks, the jackets, the boom boxes, the different hand swaps, and it's like, yeah, okay, it's worth it. I have to figure it out and maybe talk to Santa Claus.
It really does tie into my episode from last week about how many toy lines is too many toy lines, because this is like, the Ninja Turtles have been released in so many scales and so many versions, and if I didn't have any versions, then this might be the one to jump at. Like, okay, these are the ultimate collector showpiece versions, but for me, it's a pass just because I'd rather have a shelf full of a bunch of little versions of them than one gigantic, super version. Like, I never bought the really big NECA turtles they did at the quarter scale or whatever. I picked up one. I have Mikey, but I didn't collect the rest of them in that scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the quarter scale are huge, and like
Yeah.
they're just they're not for me either. Anywho,
They're definitely cool as a centerpiece for a collection, but it takes up a lot of space to display 4 or 5 or 6 if you have the foot soldier and shredder and so on and so on.
So you were talking about reissues and everything else. I want to use
We're
that
moving on to new to the
segue.
collection here.
Yeah, we are.
All right.
So speaking of reissues,
I saw that at the store. I love that they're bringing back an old Lego set. It's pretty cool.
Me too. It made me really happy. My dad got this for me for my birthday because he got me the original back in the 80s.
Okay. Nice.
And they also have a gift with purchase for this month at the Lego store. If you spend like an absorbent amount of money, you get the Blacktron, like a Blacktron ship that's like the bad guy ship.
Okay.
So I'm not doing that. I'm trading something for at an independent brick store that has one. I'm not a big as into Jurassic Park as some people are.
Right.
But I saw it in theaters, and this is an iconic scene from that movie. Like,
that's a pretty great scene.
And this was a gift from my buddy Don, who's like my secondhand man when we do tons of fun.
Okay.
And he was like, "Happy birthday, Jeff!" And I was like, "Holy crap, Don, are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay." And I'm really looking forward to building this and throwing it up somewhere. So
yeah, that's awesome.
I love everything about it.
Got the T-Rex and the Explorer and the defense system there for Jurassic Park. That's really cool.
It's fantastic. Plus, it comes with a Malcolm figure, and I didn't have a Malcolm figure.
Oh, okay. Which minifigures are in there? Does it have the kids?
It's got Tim and Lex, it's got Malcolm, and it's got Grant.
Okay.
There's no Gennaro running for a toilet, unfortunately, but with some extra Lego pieces and some creativity, I'll make that happen.
You can make that happen.
2 or 3 days after Christmas, my parents got into town.
Okay.
And my mom was like, "Let's go to Target. We need to get stuff." And I was like, "Okay." And I saw this guy on the shelf.
Yes, I am jealous. I want to find that Bane figure.
I cannot wait to take photos of him and just pose him up with Mezco Batman because the scale works perfectly.
Nice.
The box art on the back is awesome. I'm really just looking forward to toys of this year so far, and like, it's going to be a great year.
I have a showcase. Speaking of like setting up a toy room, I have a showcase that is just for like Bane, Asbat, and like the Vampire Batman, like that sort of era of late '90s, early 2000s Batman stuff. There is Asbat.
This is Asbat from The Adventure Continues.
Okay.
That comic book line, and the comic is takes place after the animated series. It's The Adventure Continues.
Right.
And John Paul Valley showed up as Azrael, and Bruce and him apparently trained at the same monastery, and they made it so that John Paul's not a psychopath.
Well, it's hard to do in a kid show kind of thing.
And Azrael was walking around in his Azrael garb, and Bruce was like, "Well, I might have a costume that'll suit you better." And there we go.
Gotcha. Nice.
But he's a fun figure.
We've kind of already set up how we got to the situation of trying to set up a new toy room. Yours is in an office, mine is in a basement, and we're kind of working with blank slates. So
it's great.
The unique thing about my space is that I have some walls that are drywall, which is perfect for mounting shelves or putting things up with thumbtacks, things like that. And then I have some walls that are wood paneling that have like stripes of wood and then like a stripe of mirror in them. It's very 70s, even though my house was built in the late 80s. So the walls that have the wood and mirror are not ideal for hanging shelves or hanging like carded figures because there's certain places you can't put a screw or you can't put a thumbtack because it's literally glass. So I'm sort of working around putting like showcases or freestanding shelves in front of those walls to save the drywall space. And I'm trying to figure out what goes where. And I know you're hanging some shelves right now.
Yes, I am. I actually have a video I can show you. So here it is after everything is said and put up. Now
there you go, the pile of stuff that's got to go on the shelves. That's how it always works.
Set up every toy in the universe. Yeah, man. Like, that's not even all of it, and I feel so bad, but it's like,
Yeah, no, that's how it goes. So how much of a pain was it to put those shelves up? You put the rails like right on the studs,
Yeah.
and then the shelves just fit on there. So you just kind
Yep.
of mess around with the level a little bit and keeping things straight.
That's it's for the most part. I put we found the studs, beep beep beep,
Yep.
and then we drilled them in, and then due to building with Lego for 30 plus years, I can eyeball something and know how much it's off or how much it's whatever. Okay, it's a
Okay.
stupid skill, but it's a useful skill. We didn't have to use the leveler or anything, and it was
Okay.
great. And
Nice.
so it took about 2 hours to do all together. I overestimated how many boards we need, so we have one more board that's just hanging out doing nothing. And yeah, it's coming along. I've got a few things already up on there. I finished my mask shelf this morning, which
Okay.
compared to my TMNT and Ghostbuster shelf, it looks a little naked. So like,
It's tricky with toy lines that are kind of like short figures, and all the vehicles tend to be kind of the same height.
mhm,
It's harder to fill a shelf if all your shelves are sort of evenly spaced. You end up with that shelf that looks kind of bare because there's a lot of head space over top. Sometimes you
mhm,
can fill those kinds of spaces in with either a backdrop or like hanging some of the flying vehicles from the shelf above it, like dangled down on some string or something, to kind of give it that height that it needs. But there's an art form to making those displays and really kind of balancing, especially when it's different toy lines next to each other.
and that's the thing too is that like I have so I think I've mentioned this before. You know that I was never into the nostalgic value of a real American hero. Like that
Right,
didn't
right.
ever affect me, right? But when they started releasing the modern figures, I was like, whatever. And then I saw Matt Tracker.
Yeah, for the 25th anniversary.
For so many years, I tried to track down Matt Tracker, and I could never do it. But thanks to a whatnot sale, I found him for dirt cheap. And I was
Nice.
like, I'll take him. And the guy was like, yeah, don't worry, he's complete. I'm like, all right, no gun.
Oh, bummer.
Yeah, but it also turns out that that Matt Tracker fits on a 1/5 scale, I think it's 1/5, maybe 1/7 scale Akira bike that I have.
Okay.
So I'm gonna throw him on that, and that's the only mixing of genres that I plan on doing because it's like you notice people that have their food when they touch and they're like, yeah, it's on the same plate and their food's
Right,
touching.
right.
I don't like I
So
don't like interweaving.
that's one of those topics that one of the things I wanted to talk about today is like some people keep everything segregated, right? This is this toy line, and it's all over here. Like this is the Transformers display, and this is the He-Man display, and none of them mix. And then there's other people that have like these great like mixed displays that look fantastic, and everyone kind of has their own style. So one of the things that's really fun about seeing different people's collections is seeing how they choose to display stuff. So like in my old house, I had sort of zones, like this was all the reaction figures were on this one display, and all the GI Joe stuff was over here, and all the He-Man stuff was over here. But I had one showcase that was in my dining room, and I used it for a lot of the lines that I only owned one or two figures from. And it was really one of my favorite displays just because it had so many different characters in it. And because it felt like it was missing a few of my favorite lines, I did end up like sneaking in like a Snake Eyes figure and a few other things just to kind of finish rounding it out. But that display case had some Street Fighter guys in it and lots of stuff from the different '90s lines, like one or two figures. And then eventually, if I got enough figures from that line that it warranted its own like display, then they would come out. But I always had fun with that mix. But I know that that's not for everybody, and it's not the way I would display any of my collections where I have a big portion of it. I
Right.
like having all the He-Man guys together, all the GI Joe guys together. But when you do run into those like weird oddball stuff, then it kind of gets fun. I've seen some cool things too with theming like a glow in the dark shelf or a translucent shelf, and it's pulling things from different lines, and that can look cool too.
Well, that's the thing too is that like I'm looking in my little corner here, and I've been debating what to do with this Batman. This is the Bandai Injustice 2 Batman,
Okay.
and he looks great, but like his cape sucks, and I don't really want to put him with all of my Batman stuff. Like my Batman, like my turtle shelf is all of my turtle stuff. It's not like
Right.
separated by Playmates or NECA or whatever, right? It's all turtles go here. Same with the Ghostbuster stuff. But like with this, I think I'm gonna put him with some of the specialty figures that I have.
Okay.
just because I think you'll fit better, if that makes any sense. And that will be the only crossing of genres that I do. Like, I have the Driss Stewart and Hasbro figure that came out because Big Brain Me was like, obviously they'll release the rest of the Mithril Hall companions. Nah,
Yeah.
not fan. And I have some of the Netflix Castlevania figures because that was one of my favorite shows, and
Right.
I loved the figures. And I was like, okay, Series 3 will come out any minute now.
I just started grabbing those Ninja Turtle Stranger Things sets because I don't have anything in my collection to represent Stranger Things, but I enjoy
Yeah.
those characters a lot. So I grabbed the first 2 packs that are out. But like the turtles don't really do much for me. They're not bad turtle figures, but I have multiple versions of the comic book turtles already. And I would never display them mixed, even though they come mixed in package. Unless I kept them boxed, I would never display them together once I took them out of the package. It would,
It wouldn't make any sense.
it doesn't make any sense at all. But I definitely want to try and figure out something with the Stranger Things characters. But that I'm tempted to put like near like my Kenner Alien stuff, maybe like not necessarily on the same shelf, but near that shelf because there's definitely a xenomorph and face hugger vibe to a lot of the creatures from the Upside Down.
Absolutely, that makes sense. But like, you can't put like, I don't know how to explain it. It's weird. Like, I wouldn't put Batman with Ninja Turtles, even though I have all the Batman and Ninja Turtle figures when they met those GameStop 2-packs. Yeah. Part of me is like, how do I display this? I guess I'll do it together, but it's icky. I don't know how to explain it, Like, there's no reason to have them together whatsoever, save for those comics and that film, but
right.
I guess the figures match up, so
that's where a lot of the crossover stuff gets weird to me. I'm not a huge fan of crossover stuff. I think that sometimes it's very appealing, the toy itself, but the stories to me always are kind of half-baked. Like the way they get the DC superheroes and the Power Rangers to meet each other in the comic, or the DC superheroes and the Masters of the Universe. It never really makes any sense. And I'm always like, okay, I guess these are 2 things I like, but they work better on their own than together. So I tend to not buy a lot of that crossover stuff other than maybe some of the G.I. Joe Transformers things.
Yeah.
Although I've missed all of the transforming Transformers, the modern ones. I have some of the old 25th anniversary style ones, like the Sky Striker that's painted to look like Jetfire and things like that.
See, that's cool though.
The new ones look so good. They sell out so fast. I haven't been able to get in on any of them.
And that aftermarket is a pain in the butt. I hear you.
Yeah, the aftermarket makes them so expensive when I really kind of only want the Joe. I want I like the Transformer. I admire the Transformer, but my biggest desire is the Joe. And then the Joes are really just reissues, so it's like it like piques my interest but doesn't get me fully, which is why I'm not like making sure I'm there to order it the second it comes out.
Yeah.
In a weird
way. Are
way.
Those Joes O-rings, or are they the modern?
They're O-ring Joes. They're made to look like the original ones,
okay.
Which is cool. There's good and bad to them making O-ring figures again. I know a lot of people like that we moved on in design, but those old Joes are just very fragile at this point. So in some ways, it is nice to get a modern O-ring reissue kind of thing. So you can have a sergeant, a stalker figure, and not worry about snapping his thumb off if you want to put his gun in his hand. Like I used to do stop motion animation with G.I. Joe figures 10, 15, almost 20 years ago at this point. But now I'm like, I don't think I'd want to pose the earliest figures that much anymore. All right, maybe somebody from the 90s will hold up to that much fiddling with it, but the early stuff, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, that's dangerous. That's some real money if you break one, and then you're like, oh,
yeah. This is gonna be a pain to replace.
Yeah, exactly. That's but yeah, I don't do the mixing of genres. Like, I was gonna bring up the Street Fighter and Transformers crossover that they've done, which is ridiculous.
Yeah,
I don't know how, and I don't know why. I just wonder what's your take on that?
I find it so interesting that like there's no real good Street Fighter line currently running, except for Street Fighter being mixed with other things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's the Street Fighter Transformers, there's the Street Fighter Power Rangers. Street Fighter is a decently popular brand, but it only gets released when it's combined with some other brand, and I just find that so odd.
It's definitely weird. I remember seeing the Ryu and I think Leonardo 2-pack,
Yeah.
and I was like, do I want this? No, but kind of yes at the same time. I'm not a big Street Fighter fan, but Leonardo is the best turtle. So,
Yeah, I was looking at the Cammy Green Ranger the other day, not in person, but just on the internet, and it's a cool looking figure, but I'm like, it doesn't even come with a Cammy head, as far as I can tell
really?
from the picture. I don't think so. Maybe it does. Maybe I missed it.
Mm,
But I think it's just always got the Ranger helmets on. Maybe they do come with the heads, but I was just like, I don't know. It's odd, and once you take, I guess if you switched the head anyway, then it's like, why is it a Power Ranger? I don't know.
yeah.
I just can't quite wrap my head around those crossover series with some of the stuff. The Cobra Kai putties from the Lightning Collection look kind of cool. They have a skeleton thing on them, like how
Mm,
Johnny wears the costume. But again, like the Cobra Kai good guys in the Power Rangers Ninjetti costumes, I'm like, I just don't care.
yeah, it makes sense to me. Hey, we were talking about cross pollination, and behind you, I like that you have three of the major toy lines of the 80s and early 80s behind you. That's hilarious.
Yeah, so I mean, this wall is basically just toy boxes. When I started moving to the house, because I'm paranoid about something ever happening down here and stuff getting wrecked, all of the biggest boxes, except for the flag box, because it's too big to put up there, just went on this. There's like a built-in bookcase down here. And
Mm,
so I've got the G.I. Joe Mobile Command Center. I've got the Return of the Jedi release Millennium Falcon. I've got Eternia. And there's actually some other stuff too, but it's just hard to see and it's kind of off camera. But I just started stacking boxes, and then I have some shelves over here, and same thing. I just put all the large boxes up on top of stuff just to kind of keep it safe in case something did happen.
I
Um,
think I think that might be the exception when it comes to setting up your toy room to people with OCD like myself. If you have multiple play sets, like you have the playset wall, that's
yes.
okay.
So
That's okay.
that's another
Yeah.
one of the things that I wanted to talk about. So in my basement here, my brother-in-law was here looking around with me, and he's like, "So are you going to do like a He-Man area and a GI Joe area, and the next thing?" And I would like to. I think it would look really super clean. The problem is that there's a giant space taking up playset from each one of the lines. So to have lots and lots of shelving, but a space to put a giant Eternia playset out, and then go to the next wall and have lots and lots of shelving for figures, but then the space for the USS Flag, and then go to and it just keeps going like that. It doesn't really work. So I want to try and maximize certain walls to be like shelves pretty tightly packed together, so I can put lots of figures up, and then like a sort of like a playset area. And one of my buddies is trying to talk me into making it into a diorama, which would be almost a little too much mixing of lines for me in a way. But like have Eternia there and have the flag there and the Terradrome and the Defiant, all the big things that are going to take up a ton of space. If I display figures on them and make it sort of a diorama kind of thing, then I feel like the stuff will mix weirder than it just being like, yep, this stuff's just all displayed together because they're giant playsets.
Well, I mean, it could be a throwback to that time travel movie with the U.S. with the aircraft carrier that went
Right.
back to 1944, right?
Yep.
And instead, GI Joe and company winds up on Eternia, and then all of a sudden they're fighting, Beastman.
You get one of those hokey crossovers like I was talking about. Like, okay, I like these two things, but I'm not following your reasoning of how this happened.
Well, you see, Doctor Mindbender opened up a portal, and then
Yeah,
it just went haywire.
I blame Cobra Law.
Oh, jeez. I have that movie, and I love it. I'm just gonna
it's
say it now.
it's great. I mean, I understand why it bugs people. 100%. It does not feel like a GI Joe movie in a lot of aspects, but it was fun. The animation is so good that it just doesn't really bother me that much. The things that actually bug me the most about it is the fact that they retconned Cobra Commander's origin, and he
Mhm.
didn't really have an origin in the cartoon. Like I understand that they're separate continuities, and they never explained who he was in the cartoon, but they definitely implied he was a human because there were parts where he like took his mask off, and you can see he has flesh-colored skin around his eyes when he wears the hood. So to have him
Mhm.
be this like blue alien guy who got mutated and has multiple eyes, it's like it doesn't make any sense.
I'm gonna impress you with some GI Joe knowledge. Wasn't Cobra Commander a used car salesman who just read a bunch of self-help books and then started in like a militia, and then that militia grew from there from somewhere in the United States? Where was it? Oh God, it was in one of the cartoons. Even it was like a nice little throwback. Shipwreck woke up
It,
with his
it
memory
the
loss, and then
the town is Springfield because there's a Springfield
yeah,
everywhere. Yeah,
mhm.
Springfield, just like in The Simpsons. Yeah, I
But
mean that's basically what it is. He's a used car salesman. In the like the deeper lore of it, you find out that like his brother um was killed a family in a drunk car driving accident, and Cobra Commander always blamed the other people. Like he did never took responsibility of his brother's actions, but it's really Snake Eyes' family that was killed in the car accident, which is why when he comes back from Vietnam, there's no one there to pick him up, and that's why he ends up going with Tommy to Japan to learn the ways of the Arashikage ninjas.
wow,
Yeah, I mean, it's over time they've intertwined it a lot. Like in the early comics, Snake Eyes' family was killed in the drunk driving accident, and then later on they did more like history stories called
hmm
Declassified, and they tied those two together that way, which kind of makes sense, to give Cobra Commander more of a reason to be disenfranchised. Not only is he like a single parent, but his brother dies, and this and that. Like, it just adds to levels of ridiculousness to his backstory that to make him so angry and do evil things.
And Storm Shadow only joined Cobra to find Zartan because he killed their master, right? Is that a
Right.
thing? Or
Right.
okay,
Yep.
okay.
Zartan's there to kill Snake Eyes,
hmm
and the uncle uses this breathing technique where he can impersonate someone else's breathing patterns, and Zartan shoots the uncle through this like wall, thinking it's Snake Eyes,
Okay.
because it's got to just be super convolutedly twisted up.
I love it.
So what about like showcases and things like that? Do you do all strictly shelves, or do you have any kind of like display cases?
Oh, I would love to do like a detail for something like that. And then I think that as my collection like pursuits grow,
Yeah.
I think like the Bandai figure and like the Mezco figures and the Mayfix figure that I have, the fancier figures would go into the showcase, right?
Right.
And like once again, that's cross pollination, and it's hard not to like this doesn't bother me. This really bothers me. This really, but it's one of those things too. Like when I set up my Batman shelf, like I have a lot of the Mattel Batman stuff because I
Okay.
really like Batman,
Yeah.
and like I'm going to be putting him next to like a Toddy McFarlane Superman. It's like, yep, this is fine because it's all DC. I don't think of it as Batman, so that
I
you
got
get
you.
tricks. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, we all make rules for our collections. So I have a
exactly.
couple of display cases. I like the details. I don't have any of them. They look really nice. The one great thing about those kind of cases where it's all glass is that you can truly see everything. The biggest problem I have with my showcases, and all my showcases are like the top portion to a hutch,
hmm
is that it's hard to get light inside there. It's hard to um, kind of see everything. You end up getting like the strips of wood that make up the door block different things. So you end up now like trying to pose the stuff in so it looks good when the doors close, and you sort of end up leaving some space behind that you can't use, or sticking a figure you don't really like that much in the spot that's hard to see.
hmm
But it's so nice to not have to worry about dusting things or things like committing suicide off the shelf. At least if they fall, like the door catches them, and you can hopefully open the door slowly enough to catch them before they fall. Uh,
that's an issue I'm dealing with right now with the new shelving. Is that on one of the shelves that's closest to the doorway, there's like an inch clearance,
okay.
and that's my Ghostbuster shelf. And I keep thinking to myself, maybe I should put the mask stuff here,
Mm,
and then I'll move the Ghostbuster stuff above the turtle stuff, and that way it looks kind of like they're evened out. But
gotcha.
then I would also have to adjust the shelf because I've got the tower of plastic,
Yeah.
So it's like, what do I do?
I have some Blockbuster shelves. They're shelving that I bought from Blockbuster Video when they closed down. It's like the
Mhm.
white shelves that the DVD cases went on and the VHS cases, and they're just slightly tilted back, like just a degree or two. But what's nice about that is that you can put figures on them, and they tend to not fall forward because the shelf leans back just a smidge. I tend to end up like standing, literally just taking the figures in the back row and just leaning them against the wall, because why bother trying to stand them if they can just rest against the back? But then sometimes the front rows, you have to lean forward a little bit. But I have far fewer toy suicides from those shelves than other shelves because they're just slightly tilted back.
You know what's the worst for toy suicides is we were just talking about Asbats, right? Like from The Adventure Continues.
Right.
Try to get these figures to stand without any tack sometimes. See how it goes. And, I'm really worried about putting those up because, like, if I breathe on them wrong, they'll just go, So
a lot of the pre-posed figures tend to not stand well. Like that era in the 90s where everybody kind of, even like the original Ninja Turtles, where they all sort of have one foot in front of the other, they just don't balance well. They look good when they're standing, but they just lose their balance very quickly.
And that journey to get them standing is a journey. So, like, it's like Noir Spider-Man here, and he's easy to balance because he's got the thick plastic back here, the thick rubber. But even then, like, I was trying to get John Walker to balance, and, like, it just wasn't happening. It just because the shield would either be in the way or whatever else, and it's like, okay. And then there's other figures like the Mattel Batman stuff, the Mattel DC line, no problem, stands up perfectly.
Yeah.
So, like, that's something that we have to take into factor, like you said, when we're displaying this stuff, because, like, what do we know will fall over if you look at it wrong?
Yeah.
And like you said, you got to put it towards the back.
I have an Arkham Asylum Bane figure from DC Direct, and his proportions are very much cartoon, like a cartoon character. Like, he has big legs, but they're not nearly as big as his ridiculous shoulders and his big backpack thing, and he falls over all the time. I used to actually have him on a shelf where there was enough. He was in the back, so he didn't jump off the shelf, but I actually used to display the stuff spread out so he could fall forward and not hit anybody else because he was knocking things off the shelf, which is just as bad, right? Breaking other things instead of himself.
That's the thing about it. Like, you could get lucky with some figures, like Spider-Man, right? Like, Spider-Man comes with a whole bunch of hands nowadays. Comes with the web crawling hands.
Yeah.
You get some wax or something, and you could have him crawling on the back, of your wall, and have your other legends, and that's what my plan is. So, because Spider-Man are not easy to pose either. They might be super bendable, but when you're super bending them, they get super loose, and that's not a good time. Yeah.
That's
my pizza Spider-Man, God rest his soul. I may have posed him one too many times.
That does happen. There's not a real great way to fix that. I know the movie Professor X figure, the Patrick Stewart Professor X figure from the early 2000s, they had floppy knees to start with. I don't know if they just didn't worry about the tolerance in the knees because he was going to sit in the wheelchair all the time, or if it was intentional that they were floppy. But I actually ended up squirting hot glue into the joint and like wiping off the excess and then bending it a bunch of times, and it tightened it up pretty well. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for a lot of figures, but I wanted that figure to stand because I was using it as a custom for something else, and it worked out pretty well. So I know that some people will do it with like a G.I. Joe figure, the 80s G.I. Joes, where you can unscrew them. You can put like a coat or two of clear nail polish on the like center post of the knee and then reattach the thighs to it, and that'll snug that up without really damaging it. I mean, yes, you are painting it, but it's clear, it's not really noticeable, and then it is snug again. But certain joints are just impossible to try and tweak with that like that.
So this is the Renew Your Vows Spider-Man. He's a great figure, perfect figure in my opinion. And I have this web stuff that I got. Can I plug somebody where I buy my web from?
Go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
So Hero Props on Instagram. Dude's name is Tyler. He makes dioramas. He makes web stuff. And so like this web stuff it's easy to use, and I don't want to take the shelf down. So
that's fine.
But like that's how I'm gonna probably pose a couple Spider-Man with wobbly legs. Like he's not Mr. Wobbles yet, but Pizza Spider-Man, he's gonna be web slinging. So
yeah,
and like that's also part of the cool thing too about displaying your collection is it doesn't just have to be this figure is on this stand like this.
Right. It doesn't have to be everybody standing in a straight pose.
Right.
That can be tough too. So like for instance, I love it when you can display guys with their accessories and put them in great poses. but they take up a lot more space. And
Mhm.
so sometimes it comes down to like, how do you want to curate your collection? Are you willing to lose shelf space to the big bulky accessories and having everybody displayed with all their stuff, or do you want to cram as many people on that shelf and put them as static and as tight together as possible? Because I see that a lot with GI Joe collectors. The '90s guys with their big missile launching backpacks get in the way of standing close together. Even my Masters Universe Classics collection, I had
Mhm.
a showcase that I kept them in, and they just kept making those figures for like 8 years. And so it got tighter and tighter, and eventually I took accessories out of almost everybody's hands. Basically, He-Man could keep his power sword, Skeletor had the Havoc staff, and if it like somehow clipped onto the guy, I'd let him have it. But if it was going to be in their hand and make that interfere with somebody else standing in front of them or overlapping them, I was like, yep, they can't hold that, because it's just gonna reduce the number of figures I can wedge into this case.
I have an important question for you with your He-Man
Okay.
classics. Did Rebel leaders still sport some heat, or did you take the gun away
From who?
from He-Man classics when Mattel's
The movie, the
the
Stout
Rebel
collection.
leader He-Man? Yeah,
I think it actually fit in his holster, so I didn't need to
yeah,
take it from him. Yeah, if
yeah.
stuff could like clip on a guy, that's what I was saying. They could wear it into the display, but
Mhm.
if it was going to interfere with taking, like, if you put it in their hand and now it pokes out from the guy, that didn't work for me. But if it could fit on their hips or fit on their back, then they could keep it with them. But like swords and stuff, it's hard to display a guy unless you put it like straight in front of them to not have
Mhm.
it take up additional space. The capes are bad enough with
That's
stealing
the
space.
that's the issue with the Driss Duerden that I have from Hasbro, is that he comes with two great swords, and then here's this non-cloth goods cape. I got a custom one almost the same day I got the figure, and that helps a little. But still, though, he's takes up a lot of valuable, real estate on the shelf. So it's a little
Yeah,
trying.
I've been going back and forth a lot over, is it better to have everything, or is it better to really be able to see what you have? Because I
Hmm.
don't really like keeping a lot of stuff scroll away. Like I was saying with my Motu Classics, I have a stack of Motu Classics that I've never opened because my display case got full, and then I just stopped opening them, and it kind of kills me. I want to open them because I want to enjoy them. That's why I bought them. I
Hmm.
plan to open them, even though now they're worth stupid money in the package. Um, but I still don't know how I'm going to display them, because I know even when I put them back in the case, if I do a slightly better job than I did the first time, they're still not all going to fit. That line is enormous.
How many figures did they make from that line? Like 200?
Yeah, I don't have a good count on it. But
Hmm.
they did like 13 figures a year for uh 8 years or something like that. Plus they did a whole bunch of sub subscriptions where it was 6 figures, 6 extra figures for 4 or 5 of the years. Plus they would do a holiday thing and like a monster thing and a vehicle. Like it blew up very quickly, from starting out with like, we're gonna make 8 figures this year, to subscribe for these 13 figures every year, to multiple sub subscriptions and this and that. And I was army building, so I have like, I think 6 Eternia guards and 6 of the Snake Men, and I have 2
That's
packs of the Horde
awesome.
troopers.
So like you're talking about like displays and stuff. So like
Yeah.
GI Joes.
Hmm.
I got into classifieds because I love it. This is
Right.
the Havoc Fortnite guy's gun because I thought it
Okay.
looked like an auto shotgun. And I was like, yeah, he needs that. And then Action Force makes their backpacks so they open.
Oh, okay.
So for a lot of like the Joes, I've replaced their backpacks with the ones that open, and I'll store their extra accessories in there if I can or not.
That's great.
Otherwise, though, it goes into a plastic bag that goes into a case, and I go, "Yep, there they all are." Because do you really need 10 sets of hands or like 10 guns that you can't clip to the figure?
That
And like,
kind of
part of me is like, "Yeah, I want those," but like, I don't know where to put these on the figure.
it kind of kills me. The extra hands and things like that. How do I store them, but also keep them organized? Like, am I really gonna bag like Lightning Collection Power Rangers? Do you know how many white gloved hands I have laying around from that? I don't even know if I could figure out whose they all are, because I'm not sure if every team has unique gloves or not. So, but like, yeah, I have so if I had a baggie of Power Ranger gloves, or a baggie of, GI Joe hands, or if I even bagged them individually and wrote it on them, it just becomes this crazy mess of like someday down the road you want to change the display, you want to change the accessories, or you end up selling part of your collection. Trying to remember where all this stuff is and get it back together becomes a kind of a nightmare. Like I have my GI Joes currently in little hardware bins, like you get the little rack and they have the little drawers, and their
Mhm.
accessories are in there. But if I displayed the guys, I probably wouldn't put all their accessories with them because I'm worried about busting their thumbs off. So then it's like, do I keep all those hardware bins just for the accessories and somehow label them so later on it's easy to match them back up? Like these are the weird collecting issues that are hard to solve.
Well, that also leads to another question too. Like you said, you've got a bunch of GI Joes and you got a bunch of this. Every collector has a bunch of whatever. I have a bunch of Lego minifigures.
Right.
Do you cherry pick what figures you want to display if you have to like sacrifice the room? Like I don't have enough room for all of my 87 Joes, but I
Right.
have enough room for all of my Night Ops Joes. So what do I do here? Do you cherry pick or do you just go, I'm going to do this and stick to it?
Well, when I did the Motu Classics, which was probably the thing that I had displayed the best in my old house, where I had like the predominant amount of the line on display. I had shelves within the display case. It has 3 shelves on each side, so it's like 6 segments, right? I had like one for the heroic heroes, one for the Skeletor's crew. I think the one below that I might have had 2000X inspired guys, and then I had Shira's people, the Horde, and then I had one that was sort of the new adventure style stuff. I think that's 6. And so basically, eventually, like the hero shelf just filled up, and I couldn't put any more heroes on, but they had basically finished that line. Um, and the reason I started doing like the 2000X shelf was it gave me a place to put a few more of the heroes in a place that kind of made sense for them. But as a shelf got too tight, like the Skeletor shelf, the Evil Warriors shelf filled up, I just stopped opening new Evil Warriors they released, which wasn't like the core ones, but now they were doing like some Filmation specific guys, and they just never got opened. Whereas like the Shira shelf, I was able to keep putting people on that shelf because it wasn't quite as tight, and like the new Adventure shelf had enough space that actually when the movie figures, the 87 movie figures came out, they went on that shelf together, even though it wasn't
Mhm.
quite a great fit. It just was open real estate, basically. So that's kind of what I've done in the past. My GI Joes have never been displayed well. I basically had some of the play sets out. It was sort of the plan was always to do a really good Joe display, and it just never happened because they were
Mhm.
sort of like being protected. Like, all right, well, I don't want to just put these guys on the shelf and then rearrange it later. So they just kind of were in the bins, and I was working on collecting accessories for them and things like that. I had some of the big play sets out in my old house. I had a closet in the toy room. It was because it was like a bedroom, and it wasn't the only room I kept toys in, but there was a particular room that I called the toy room. Anyway, I put shelves in the closet, and that's where I had all the big play sets. So the Defiant was on the bottom, the tactical battle platform with like the hovercraft and the night foil or the hydrofoil were in the middle, and then I had the mobile command center and a few other things, the terror drum in like a stack, and I just had some figures displayed on that, but for the most part, the figures, the entire collection was never on display. So I don't
Yeah.
really know what I would do with them. My
You got to use
Ghostbusters,
the flag if you do anything
well,
with it. It's
yeah.
the
So I
same
had the
thing.
flag set up for a long time, and the flag was actually one of the things where I sort of mixed genres. The flag was in a different room where I had space for it, and I sort of just put random stuff on it that when I would get things that were new, if they were in scale with it, I just kind of would set them on there as sort of opposing. So it was an odd um, mix of GI Joes, 3 3/4 inch Marvel movie figures. It had the helicoptery thing from Avatar. Like it just anything I bought that was sort of like the right scale was just on it. It was sort of like a goofy fun display. Um, the flag is great for displaying stuff, but do you want to cover your flag with 1,000 action figures so you can't see it, or do you want to just put like a Sky Striker on it and a couple of guys on the tower so it looks like a nice display?
I like I said, not a GI Joe guy except for the
Yeah,
classifieds, but I know stuff.
right.
I don't know. I thought the Tomahawk, the rescue chopper,
Yeah,
a Sky Striker, the support crew for the Sky Striker, and like the Air Hawk,
yeah, the Skyhawk,
Skyhawk.
little
Sorry,
green. Yeah.
Yeah, and throw that on the elevator part and like yada, and then
Yeah.
that
Pretty
gives
much
you
it.
reason enough to put on like your figures. You've got Lifeline, and you've got the driver of the Tomahawk getting ready to take off and do things. You've got whoever drives the Airhawk getting ready to do things, and then you've got the Joes that are associated with the Sky Striker, near the Sky Striker, and you tell a little story of the flag getting ready
Right.
to go to Cobra Island, and maybe like on the next shelf over, you got the Terradrome up, and they're flying. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. It's a little scene, as opposed
Mhm.
to using it as a sole like display of I'm just gonna pile all these guys on top of it. It's fun to
Right.
have a little scene, a little story there, but it makes it take up even more room in a way. You
It
know.
kills the real estate. It
Yep.
does. Like a situation like that, if a flag would have to be at the base of whatever, like the bottom of whatever you're doing,
Yeah.
and then above that maybe display some of the Joes and the vehicles on multiple shelves. And then if you're doing two sections of wall like that with the same way with the Terradrome and whatever,
Right.
that's still a lot of real estate. But what if you say I want to use the Defiant instead? Once that thing's unfolded and you've got all the ricamac and everything else done, that's almost as much real estate as the flag, from what I understand.
It's not as wide or like as long, but it's
Mm,
really deep and it takes up a ton of space. Yeah, it's a
right.
there. All that stuff is a giant space hog. The Terradrome is probably the best one, I think, as far as like display ability. Like if you want to put a bunch of stuff on it, it has
Mm,
all these little computer terminals. It has lots of foot pegs. Um, yeah, you can't access all the little doors on the inside of it once you start displaying figures, but you can build a scene with that, and it makes sense. Like unless they're doing like a ceremony on an aircraft carrier, there's no reason to have rows and rows of people up there. But you can kind of have like all the Cobra troops filling up the Terradrome like they're under attack and everyone's, all hands on deck,
mhm.
everyone's attacking, aiming their guns or whatever.
But then you have to ask yourself, do I just put Televipers in all these control panels? Do I have all the Televipers I need to put in these computer panels or
Well,
not?
you can put Televipers and Technovipers, you could put a Cobra officer. Like there's different ways of doing it depending on what your collection looks like.
And that's the fun part about collecting too, is that like in our minds, this figure goes here because this is how it's supposed to be because this person has this job. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like in my Ghostbuster stuff, Winston drives the Ecto one.
There you go.
Well, why isn't somebody? No, because Winston does. The cartoon said so.
Yeah.
So And you were talking about your Ghostbuster stuff before I kind of interrupted you. So sorry
No, that's
about
all right.
that.
But yeah, the same thing with there. Like I have a whole bunch of the different alternate versions of the Ghostbusters, but I didn't dedicate a huge amount of space to the Ghostbusters in my old collection. I had Ecto 1, or not Ecto 1, the Firehouse with Ecto 1 peeking out, and I had a whole bunch of the ghosts on the roof. And then it was next to like an IKEA cube thing, and one cube was the like Mattel movie versions of the characters, and then one was sort of like the real Ghostbuster action figures. And I just kind of had a bin in the back behind the ones I could display on out front, which was basically the original versions and the fright features. And it was just full of the extra figures. And would I have loved to have had them all on display? Yeah, but I didn't really have the space, and they just kept dominoing each other because
Mm.
a lot of my Ghostbusters figures are they're played with. There a lot of them are ones that I've picked up over the years at flea
Oh
markets and stuff.
yeah.
So those hips on those old Kenner figures, they just bloop and fall
Whoop.
over and domino everybody down. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So it turned into a bin. I'm hoping to do something a little better here, but that's one of those situations where I'm trying to decide if I can't display all these Ghostbusters variants, is it worth hanging on to all these Ghostbuster variants? Should I be letting some of these go to another collector so that way I can curate my collection and enjoy what I've got here and not just be like warehousing all this extra stuff?
That's the thing of it too. When I got back in, so I mentioned it before. I was into Lego. Like Lego was my thing. I was like action
Right.
figures. I don't care. And then started watching channels and started doing all this stuff. And I was like, you know what? I like my action figures still. So, and I dug out the Ghostbusters that I had, and I was like, okay, but I need more. So I limited it to what I'm going to collect and how much I'm going to collect it. Like the fright features might be some people's jams, not mine.
Yeah.
I just want the classic four Ghostbusters in the jumpsuits. Give me the Lewis Tully that came with the weird backpack. I have a proton pack for him. We're set.
Yeah.
Give me a Janine. We're set.
Well,
And
that's similar to what I was displaying.
yeah, yeah,
That's what
yeah.
I put out. Like I did have the fright features on display only because I had so many of them as a kid because
Mhm.
I couldn't find the Wave 1 versions. I had Egon from Wave 1 and then because it was never like my core thing, it was always like a secondary thing I would collect. I ended up with like I got Egon and the Firehouse and Ecto 1 the first year. And
It's like
then year 2 when I tried to grab stuff, it was like, "Oh, they're all the fright features guys." So
mhm.
even though they weren't the versions I wanted, I'm very nostalgic for the fright feature guys.
Oh sure. I mean the Fright Feature Ray with the Ecto goggles
Yeah.
is my favorite version of Ray. And my dad was going to take a Dremel tool and drill a hole so he could have the proton pack on his back.
Okay.
And at the last minute, I was like, no, don't. I was like 7 or 8 or something.
Yeah.
And I regret it. I really wish that, I'm an adult now. I sort of know how to use power tools. I might do it one day just so that my Ray fits with the image of Ray in my head with, the zip
Right.
down, because
Yeah.
that's Ray. He's got the goggles and,
No, I like that idea of that stuff. I would love to have I mean obviously would love to have really pristine proton packs for them to display, but in some ways I also wouldn't mind just having like a repro backpack that doesn't have the proton stream on it so you could stick it on their back and they would just look good geared up. Well, I do have those guys, but I mean on the original.
Oh no, I know. I'm agreeing with you
Yeah,
100%. I was just
but
when these came out, I
it fit on the
flipped
shelf so nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
I flipped out when I saw these because I was like, oh my god, that's the thing that I've been waiting for forever. And like,
They
sorry, I
No,
know
you're
there's
right. They finally made a product that we've been wanting for a long time. Like we always wanted Kenner style but movie versions. I mean, yeah, even as a kid, I loved the real Ghostbusters cartoon, and that was actually my introduction to Ghostbusters. But once I saw the movie, I was like, why don't these look alike at all? You know?
exactly. And anyway, it's good to be a collector these days. Is all I'm
Yeah, I
saying.
mean, well, everybody that's making the toys, designing the toys now, are people our age. They know exactly what we want because it's what they wanted.
Mhm.
It's kind of the heyday of it. I sometimes think to myself, like, am I spending too much? But I know there's only a certain window that we're going to be the key audience for, and so I might be sinking a little more than I want to right now. But in 2, 3, 4, I don't know when years will the guys my age that are designing toys get replaced by the people that are a little younger than me that are more interested in the 90s, the later 90s brands than the early 90s stuff that I grew up with at the end. Um, and I'll stop seeing the lines that are kind of aimed at me. So it's like, all right, grab them while I can, enjoy them while I can.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy how the popularity of like something like Skeleton Warriors that at the time nobody cared about. Nobody
Yeah,
cared. But now
right.
it's like, oh man, I finally got this whole Skeleton Warriors collection. And it's just like, okay,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, it's funny how we all kind of collect stuff that we didn't care about as a kid.
mhm.
I have a ton of toy lines like that. I liked the Captain Planet cartoon show. I thought the toys were kind of interesting, but I avoided it. I sort of talked about that in my Too Many Toy Lines episode. As a kid, I really tried to narrow down what I collected because
Yeah,
I only got so many gifts and only had so much allowance. And if I went after every cartoon show I liked, I would have had just like one hero from everything, and that's no fun.
mhm.
So stuff like Captain Planet I admired at the store but never bought it, and now I have a ton of it. I don't really worry about the accessories on a line like that, but I do have the majority of the figures, and it
Mhm.
makes a fun little display. Got Captain Planet, the Eco Tiers, and a bunch of the bad guys. It's great.
And you've got the Land of the Lost stuff, which is amazing.
Yeah, I
I
have a
love that show.
pretty big collection of Land of the Lost. That was another one of those lines I looked at all the time in stores. Hemmed and hawed about it. Kind of wanted it because I kind of liked the show, but just never made the bit the bullet because I was getting GI Joe, and Ninja Turtles kind of at that time. But now that I have it, because it's not a super popular line, so I picked it up. But if you guys don't know much about the Land of Lost line, you have to check out the previous Pegwarmers episode about that. We kind of play with a bunch of the figures and show off different action features and stuff.
It's really
It's
great.
it's a pretty funny line in sort of the cheesiness of some of the action features built into it.
Absolutely. I'm still waiting for the Pegwarmers episodes about Starcom, but I guess I'll just hold my breath on that one.
Eventually, so the hardest thing is, I mean, there's a million toy lines I would love to cover, but it
Hmm.
comes down to needing a good representation of the toy line,
Yeah.
preferably the entire toy line, but that's often very difficult if the toy line's big. So I'm always kind of looking for somebody that has a lot of the toy line or is kind of an expert on that toy line, or it's something I'm working on completing. I have a lot of collections that I'm like, oh, if I could get, those last two things, I'd be like, yep, here's the Pegwarmers episode on it. But I'm missing something that I feel is important enough that, I don't want to have to cut to a picture from I saw off the internet of it to be like, oh yeah, and they also made this really cool thing. Like if you watch the Land of Lost episode, the one thing I don't have in my collection is the Scarface T-Rex. He's kind of like the centerpiece of that collection. I don't have him, you know? But I wanted to do that episode because when I was getting ready to move and I was actually downsizing that collection a little bit, I had kept a big portion of it, but I had loose and carded versions of a whole bunch of the stuff. So that was the reason we focused on that episode then, and I didn't wait and try and get Scarface, I've never seen him in person. I know that they did make him. I saw him as a kid, at retail and stuff, and he's a goofy dinosaur. Like, he's not a good-looking dinosaur toy.
No.
Maybe not as bad as the G.I. Joe T-Rex, but he just
Wait,
doesn't.
what?
Oh, you don't know about Dino Hunters? There's a G.I. Joe toy. It was one package that was meant to kind of compete with Jurassic Park or tag on to Jurassic Park. They retooled a vehicle, they repainted a couple guys, and packed in a rubber dinosaur. And it's so cheap that instead of having the T-Rex's arms stick out, they're like folded in, so it's like a one-piece like mold.
That is
And
fantastic.
it's terrible, and it's very expensive. Like, the whole set is expensive, the T-Rex is expensive, but it's hilarious.
I'm going to have to look that up after this episode.
Yeah. So kind of where we were at when we are talking about, possibly letting go of stuff. What do you do when you run out of space?
I go to a show with like 20 or 30 figures that I don't want anymore, and I put them up for sale.
There you go.
It hurts. It hurts.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I've taken stuff to auctions before, but rarely stuff I'm getting rid of, or rarely stuff that I have one copy of. Like, years ago, I had multiple subscriptions to the Masters of the Universe Classics collection because I wanted, to have access to multiple sets of the Army Builder things, or what if the subscription figure, for some reason, I needed two versions. I don't know. Like, I just was hyper about it, and I had the income at the time, so I was getting two subs a lot of the years. So eventually I sold a bunch of those through an auction, or I would pick up things. I did a little bit of, like, toy speculation investing. Sometimes I would see something that I thought was really cool, but it was on clearance, or I just thought, like, oh, this is the start of a line. Like, when the 2012 Ninja Turtles came out, I bought an extra set of the Turtles and Shredder and Splinter and was like, yep, I'm just gonna keep these in a box, pack them away.
Ooh, those are big money now.
The 25th anniversary G.I. Joe Sky Striker, like, I bought an extra one of that and put it away. So just things like that. Occasionally a Lego set here or there. And so sometimes I would take those to an auction, but then when I went to move, it was like, I really need to pare down. So I ended up doing like an estate sale at my house. So I priced everything and had people over. It was kind of like having a yard sale, but it was inside because it was like February. Yeah. I've been to a toy show here or there, but it gets tricky, especially if you don't have access to toy shows or you don't have enough stuff to really be a vendor. Facebook Marketplace is not a bad option if there's other collectors in your area. It can be kind of a hassle because people are just crappy on Marketplace, like setting up appointments and not showing up, or there's some scammers out there. So that can be tricky, but that's a good way if you don't want to invest the time into, setting up at a show or paying for a table somewhere. Even just a flea market's not bad. If you know that there's some collectors in your area, some flea markets are better for that than others. There's sort of a toy scene at some flea markets, and that's a decent way of not paying a ton of money for a table to sell some stuff. But generally for that, you don't want to take super high-end stuff because it's sitting outside on a table all day,
Pretty much it. Yeah, Oklahoma doesn't have a lot of that, unfortunately. Okay. It doesn't in my area. So, like, when a toy show or something comes up, I say this. There's one coming up on the 28th that I'll be selling at, but
Okay.
if I want to go to like even like a kind of fun toy show, Texas has one every first Saturday of the month,
All right.
and like besides that, that's a 3 hour drive for me,
Yeah, it's a pretty big commitment.
and I'd love to go down there and hang out with the dudes and like get lunch and all that stuff, but like that's a
Yeah.
3 hour drive
Right.
there,
Right.
and then a 3 hour drive back, and it's like I went down there and I picked up, I picked up this effect that I needed for a figure,
Okay.
and I spent $5. Is it worth the trip? No.
No, have it shipped to you.
Exactly. But like the bigger shows, the bigger shows that are down there, like Retropalooza and a couple of the other ones, like those are really worth going to because 9 times out of 10, the friends have a big booth and like everybody's there,
Right.
and like it becomes less of a hunting for toys as hanging out with your friends, and then you get to hunt for toys at the same time, and it's like this is
Right.
the best time ever.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a big thing about going to toy shows and things like that. It depends on what your social group is like. If you have toy collecting friends, you're not just going to buy toys. You're going to hang out with people and see people and stuff like that. Versus like, oh, I'm going to this toy show and I'm just gonna walk around and see what I can spend money on. There's different there's a different level of satisfaction you get out of that, I think.
That's one of the biggest differences between like a toy show and a Lego show. Lego show is more art show than it is like selling. There's
That's
vendors
true.
there.
That's true.
There's vendors there, but everybody there is like a friend you haven't met for the most part. So,
Gotcha.
yeah, and like talking about mocks and sets, and anyway, that's another show.
Well, Jeff, good luck with setting up all your shelves and getting your figures on display. I hope to be able to show off some more of my stuff in the near future as I get displays set up. But if you have any like images of the shelves you've got done, I know you've shared a few with me before. I'll try and stick a few into the episode, and I'm gonna make sure there's some photos of my situation in here, just so people can get a better idea of what's going on. But in the comments down below, let me know what kind of collecting displays you guys have done. What can you do to improve your own displays? Have you ever considered taking everything down and putting it back up to really take advantage of your space versus just trying to tweak displays you've had set up for years? I love hearing about what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, and same to you, Kevin. Good luck with your stuff, and I do too. I like to hear about people. Anyway.
All right, guys. Thanks for hanging on the peg with us.